CargoWise Landside is deeply committed to revolutionizing landside logistics. With a complete enterprise system built for modern trucking and container drayage operators that includes proven drayage transportation management, digital rate and quote management, real-time container track and tracing, and on-demand truck, trailer, and container storage. Excellence in container drayage starts with the right software. Enhance transportation management, optimize shipment execution, and improve intermodal business operations with Trinium TMS, Draymaster, GeoStamp Track, and SecureSpace. To learn more, please visit cargowise.com/landside.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon or good evening if you're joining us from somewhere that's not in the Western Hemisphere. I'm Eric Johnson, and you are joining LogTech Live, Friday, October 18th. I think that sounds right. I am super excited that you could join us today. We have a great guest, someone I've known for a few years now, who's doing some really interesting stuff in the truck brokerage world. Real quick, I just wanted to say a huge thanks to my friend Brian Glick at Chain.io for stepping in and guest hosting our last episode where they talked about cargo theft in the cargo space. Really appreciate the last minute step in there. It turns out it was my birthday last episode, and my wife had a surprise for me that day that she didn't tell me about, obviously, because it's a surprise, but I didn't know. So I was planning to do the show, but in any case, Brian was great for stepping in and doing that last minute for me. Hopefully not so good that you'd rather have him host than me, but we'll see. Put it in the comments. Just a couple things. So TPM, you've heard me talk about it. Registration launching, agenda is up. We're adding to that week by week. We are about halfway through the advance rate period. So after November 10th, rates start to really go high, as if it's not expensive enough already. It's obviously worth it. It's valuable, but it's not a insignificant investment. So if you're planning to come, book now, you'll get advance rates. If you're not planning to come, you should be. So you should use the advance rates so you don't pay full price after November 10th. So that's there. We have some big speaker announcements coming up in the next couple of weeks. So keep your eyes out for that. As if you needed more inducement to come to TPM, but we try to make it sweeter each year. Break bulk registration. We put on an event, obviously, in every spring in New Orleans that's focused on the break bulk and project cargo space. Early bird rates are open for that right now, I believe, through the dates scrolling by in the banner for me, through December 15th. So you have a bit of time there, but why wait? Just do it now. It's a great event. For those of you who are in that space, it is really the preeminent event from a session and information and a perspective. We obviously spend as much time on that event from an editorial perspective as we do TPM and Inland. So I'll be back in New Orleans next spring doing technology-focused programming for folks who are involved in the break bulk and project space. So definitely encourage you to register for that. I'm on week 4 of a 5-week stretch of being at different conferences and being on the road. Family is super happy with me right now, how much I'm gone and not doing household chores. But it's been great. Had a chance to meet a bunch of people in the ports community in Hamburg 2 weeks ago. Sorry, not 2 weeks ago. It was last week. It was a fantastic event. Really, for me, the best one yet. A lot of calls to action for the port community to digitize, so it was great. Next week, I'm headed to DatCon, first time ever, so I'm super excited to speak at that event and be part of it. That's obviously key in the brokerage and truckload space. So yeah, at some point the travel will slow down, but not for a couple more weeks. As I usually do, blended pledge. You've heard me if you've seen multiple episodes of this show, you hear me talk about it most weeks. This is a great initiative started by Sarah and the Let's Talk supply chain team to make sure that there's the diversity in the industry is represented on stage and that no one is being held back because they don't have the budget to travel to industry events. I'm lucky. I get to go to a ton of industry events and meet so many people in an industry, but not everyone has that good luck. And so this is a way to sort of help support those who really need to be seen in different events to represent the way the industry actually looks in real life. Okay, news of the week. The news does not slow down. I think at our last episode, if I'm not mistaken, we went through the week of the port strike, 3 days, and by the time the show happened on Friday, there had already been a resolution, or at least a temporary resolution to the strike. So that's still ongoing. We're still sort of in a kick the can down the road holding pattern until January, where the contract could or potentially be signed, or they could go back on strike again, the ILA. In the meantime, Port of LA and Long Beach have seen huge volumes over the summer. Some of it probably having to do with volume shifting over from the East Coast to the US West Coast. That has now translated, as my colleagues Laura Robb and Bill Mongaluzzo wrote this week, into literally the highest dwells in 2 years on rail out of LA and Long Beach. The ports are still largely fluid, right? We're not seeing anything like we saw during the peak of the pandemic, but in terms of congestion, we're not seeing a lot of ships outside of the harbor, but we are seeing some of these metrics that indicate that things are there's a lot of volume to contend with. We're starting to see that. Now, we're also starting to hear that things are tapering off a little bit in the Trans-Pacific. But, again, the strike issue is going to come back up in mid-January. We have an interesting thing happening at the beginning of November that may induce some shippers to move cargo up a bit. So January is going to be an interesting one to watch, an interesting time. And in fact, the 6 to 8 weeks leading up to January is actually going to be interesting. That's usually the time when on the ocean side, things start to slow down, but we may see some acceleration of volume due to that uncertainty. As I mentioned, I was at the IAPH World Ports Conference in Hamburg, and one of the stories that I reported on last week was how an IAPH committee started to focus on harmonizing port calls from container ships, right? To help make Nicole, you can go to the next story. Sorry. So ports run more efficiently when ships are not in port waiting to berth, right? And ships don't like to spend a lot of time speeding up to get into to arrive at a port only to wait at anchorage because the berth is occupied. So there's a big call around convening the ports industry, port authorities, terminal operators to sort of figure out how to schedule port calls in a more cohesive manner so that minimize carbon emissions, so that they're running more efficiently, so you have the right amount of labor at the right time to unload and reload vessels. So that was a big topic of conversation in Hamburg, and wrote about it here. So definitely encourage you to read that piece. And then, related to the ILA contract that's still pending signature, there's an estimate, and we wrote about this, I believe, earlier this week. There's an estimate that the new contract and wage increase that's been agreed would add about $5 billion in labor costs. I've seen some breakouts in terms of what that means per container. It's not insignificant, but I think in the grand scheme of things, I'm editorializing a little bit here. In the grand scheme of things, we're still talking about probably pennies per product that would be added through this labor. So there's a lot of oohs and ahs about how much the union is asking for and how much they make already. The international ocean transportation network is still a very efficient and cost-effective way to move goods around the world. So we're talking about very incremental costs, but $5 billion is still a not insignificant amount of money. So interesting to see what's that translates into in terms of total sort of network cost, if they're able to agree on those wage increases that were being discussed. So we'll be watching that. We'll be watching a bunch of things. We're now headed into the holidays, so things are not going to slow down. So that's a lot to talk about ocean. We're going to shift gears now and talk about trucking, and specifically the freight brokerage world. I'm super excited to have my guest on this week, John Tozer, who's Chief Operating Officer at a company called newtrul, if you're not familiar with them. John, so glad you could join us today. As we were talking about before, in researching for this episode, I didn't realize John and I are both Wisconsin Badgers, so automatically he gets a lot of goodwill and good credit in the bank. But John, really glad you could be here. Do you want to maybe give people, before we get into what newtrul is, just give people a little bit of background on yourself before you co-founded newtrul?
Yeah, for sure. So great. Thank you for having me, and great to be talking to everybody here today. I'm Wisconsin, obviously.
Definitely.
So yeah, and we're not even too far apart on our graduation dates.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I have no gray in the beard, so it's obvious. Obvious who is the senior member here, but
slightly more. I'm trying to get mine going, so we'll see what I can do for you. But yeah, thank you. My background, so I did ROTC at Madison. I have a slightly different background than, or maybe unique than a lot of folks in the industry. I was a military aviator for just over a decade before co-founding newtrul. I flew the Navy's Black Hawk variant and then instructed in that helicopter system. Was a standardization officer, training officer, operations officer on multiple deployments. So I was talking a little bit, Eric, before this, that there's so much correlation between the DoD and freight and the processes, system standardization that's required in order to run an effective engine, if you will. And it's really informed a lot of the go-to-market stuff that we've been doing with newtrul, and a lot of the way that we've been both, what we've built in the past, but what we're building right now and how we're looking towards the future. So that's my background's slightly different, but a lot of the same problems, a lot of the same challenges exist. One of those.
It's not unusual at all. I think not just your particular background is unique, but there's so much crossover between the military and logistics world, obviously, because so much of military is logistics. So much of the freight world caters, I shouldn't say so much, but there is a segment that caters specifically to DoD and the military, right? So I'm never surprised when people who are, in the military come over to this side of the world, because there's so much that the private sector has to learn from the way things are run at a really important scale, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was a fairly easy transition that way. A lot of the same change management problems or challenges, if you will. A lot of the same process challenges.
Yeah. How long were you with DoD?
So I was 11 years active and then 2 reserve after that. When we started newtrul, so when I transitioned in 2019 from active service to essentially founding and starting newtrul, I did a little bit. I didn't, as most founders do, didn't take a paycheck for the first year, so needed to supplement both health insurance for the kids as well as a little bit of money. So I did. There's a special operations helicopter squadron out of Jacksonville, Florida, that you have to kind of pledge it, but I pledged it and got accepted to that. So I did that for about 2 years, every couple of weekends a year, just to maintain currency proficiency. So it was exciting. It was fun, but it became a little bit too much to try to do both of those things. So
that sounds like a lot. I think most founders are not probably flying helicopters.
No, yeah, that's accurate.
Yeah.
I did my last flight in October of 21. So
full time since then. So you said newtrul was founded in 2019?
Yep, in 2019, and I was full time then. Like my even when I was on some of those like reserve training sessions, it would be like 12 hours newtrul here, 6 hours over here. There were long days, but it was as anybody that's started anything that's listening right now knows, like, you have to put your heart and soul to that.
It becomes your life.
Yeah. You dedicate a lot of time to that.
Yeah. As an aside, this has nothing to do with freight, but like one of the reasons why I love talking to people like you and others who've started their own businesses in our industry is I grew up in Southern California across from one of my neighbors owned a shop near us. And
Yeah.
I didn't appreciate it at the time, but as I've gotten older, I just realized how much that shop was essentially their life. It was a 24/7 thing. And there was no real vacation. There was no like time off. And so the startup community sometimes gets battered on LinkedIn and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I'm like, the one thing I will always have, I may not always think that the thing they're trying to solve is the most important thing, but to be appreciative of entrepreneurs, you have to like understand that it is like the ultimate like time commitment, maybe outside of military, right? Is probably the only comparable thing. So,
well, once again, a lot of correlation there, right?
yeah, for sure. So, okay. Give people the elevator pitch extended on what newtrul is. What is the goal? What was the goal when you started, and has it changed? And who are your customers?
Yeah. So the punchline and the goal remains the same. It's to unlock the full potential of the mid-size freight broker. So we really focus on the over-the-road, full truckload, mid-size broker. We really have three.
Mid-size, how would you define that?
So I define that as greater than 10 million in revenue up to about 100 million. So I think the last time recently somebody posted, there's about 25,000 or so MCs that are broker MCs, if you will, that are active right now. And so big picture, digital freight matching marketplace built on proprietary integrations into the system of record. So what that means in layman's terms is instead of taking kind of a Craigslist approach to the digital freight matching marketplace where you can post and you can, and there's maybe less integrity associated with that, we integrate directly into TMSs, either proprietary TMSs or your out-of-the-box TMSs like your McLeods, your Mercury Gates, your Aljacks, your Ties, etc. They're fairly
to be clear, the broker TMS.
That's accurate. Yep. Very clear. Yep. And so we pull in, and so one of what I saw in my previous life was change management is so insanely difficult. I'll kind of go on a slight tangent here, but we're
all about tangents. Go.
Yeah, let's do it. Right.
Yeah.
Anytime the main vendors for the helicopter that I flew were Sikorsky, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon. So they were the ones that provided the software and the hardware. I think I
can see all their offices from my
yeah. Their offices and the people that lobby for them are probably
they live next to me. So yeah.
I've talked to many of those folks actually.
Yeah.
But anytime they pushed one of those software changes, it quite literally, like if you think about it, I'm flying and instructing, somebody next to me, and I have these key sets that will put different things on my screen. And when they push a software change, it changes my habit pattern, but it really changes my flight scan. So like what I expect to see, I don't see anymore. And so it almost becomes a safety of flight issue when you push those changes. And you have to spend a lot of time kind of understanding how that scan is going to change. And so that change management piece, giving folks, and now bringing it back to kind of the brokerage land, giving folks software that changes their habit patterns is almost detrimental. Like our goal at newtrul is to reduce your cost to serve and to increase loads per day per rep that a carrier rep can book. Right. So that's one of the ways that you do that. When I change their habit patterns, or I change their operational processes by giving them a new tool, I almost do the opposite. And sometimes, right. Yeah, so that's why we took this kind of integration approach where you just add loads the same way that you had before. I'll build the rules in the back end. I'll integrate them directly over. You establish your custom rule set as you're implemented into the software, and then you can start leveraging some of the same stuff, but we'll have our algorithms and our AI in the background in enabling your operations as opposed to inhibiting those operations.
So not to continue the military theme, I promise.
Yeah.
At some point we'll, but people might have heard me refer to this. To me, this is I call this the SEAL Team 6 software category, where it comes in, everybody is unaware that they were even there, and then they leave and you just go about your business, right? Like, so yeah, I totally agree. I was at a conference I mentioned, a software conference this past week, and talking about, deploying 125 different updates to the system over the last year. That's 2 a week, but the idea is that the software improves in the background, but the way that people use it doesn't change at all, right? It can't be an update. It's like, oh, my thing is in the wrong place now, and I spend weeks relearning, that like mental process. So I think what you're talking about is not talked about enough, and it's probably like way more important than we give it credit for it. So
yeah, one challenge that you find there, is being transparent with like the reporting around that, because it's working in the background, it's working so well. Sometimes then you have an additional problem where you have to show the value. They're like, oh, right, like, and some of that
my system just started working better or something.
Yeah.
We don't know the reason. We can't attribute why, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's
interesting.
That's spot on. It's attributing the value and being transparent with that value and getting ahead of some of those discussions, and ensuring that people like see like, oh yeah, I mean, we have a really soft carrier market right now, right?
Yep.
So a lot of folks are reducing teams and bringing it down to minimum viable. Some of them are preparing for the shift whenever that comes.
Right.
And so you have to kind of be very malleable, very flexible with those teams. And that's what we're really focused on right now, is how do we give folks the ability to be flexible in a dynamic market. So that's digital freight matching is the first step to that. The second step that we're doing right now and that we recently launched is a carrier sales CRM. So and I have a couple of stories around this too, but like, I don't know about you. I don't know how often you leverage any CRM for really anything, but for me, it's like getting a CRM set up and started is the bane of my existence. I feel like I have to, like, as somebody who just likes to solve a problem and knock out the first thing in front of me, and then like create the strategy and the vision and then move, like sitting down and data entry. And it just, I feel like
setting up all the dominoes, right?
Yeah. I feel like I need a 6-pack of beer and like a tub of ice cream to keep that dopamine up while I'm doing it. Right.
Frozen custard.
Yeah. There you go. A little bit better for you.
So CRM, super interesting topic. I know we talked about that a few weeks ago, and I definitely want to get to that because I have some thoughts on that specifically.
Yeah.
Let's take a step back. So I think one thing that particularly is still, I think, unclear for the market and for me, even though I report on this stuff, how would you describe the difference between sort of a freight marketplace and a load board? Because a load boards have been around forever. I mentioned I'm going to DAT's conference next week, right?
Yeah.
They are still very much a part of the industry, right? And so how would you explain the difference between those two? And is the industry evolving more toward marketplaces, or is there room for both to exist?
I think there's room for both to exist. And I think it goes back to the statement around like the dynamicness of, if dynamicness is a word,
you're making it a word. Yeah.
I'll make up a couple words during this anyway. So of the market. So soft carrier market, load boards, you can post, we call it kind of post and pray. So you can post out there, you can find a truck pretty easily right now, quite frankly. Right.
Yep.
And so, the difference that I see within the what I call the digital freight matching marketplace and a load board is how you leverage your network and the differences there, particularly around like we go in network first, out of network second. So because we have that integration, it's because we have the system of record, the TMS integration, I sync up any carrier that is onboarded, not in a DNU status, has passed all of the compliance associated with that. So I can prioritize your in-network carriers versus your out-of-network carriers.
Yep.
I can make that I can then enable digital transactions. I can enable non-digital transactions. So I think kind of the robustness of a digital freight matching marketplace versus a load board marketplace, and quite frankly, the integrity associated with that. The analogy, and I try to stay away from analogies, but I think they really are important for like understanding, at least baseline understanding, maybe not first principle understanding, but we took kind of like the eBay Expedia approach versus the Craigslist approach. And that's how I kind of have the analogy of the difference between what a marketplace is and what we see a marketplace as and what the load board is, despite the fact that like you can argue that we do support load board type activities.
Yep. So, the segment of the market you're targeting is not necessarily the type of broker that has their own load board, but certainly a lot of brokers do have their own load board. So how would they think about what when you're approaching them, how should they think about like what you're trying to move them toward versus what they may have in turn? I mean, maybe those websites do have their own boards, right? So
say that again.
Yeah. No, sorry. So how do you sort of approach a broker who may have their own load board or, maybe using load boards and say like, this is the approach we're trying to move you toward?
Yeah, it's, so the two ways. One, you have your own load board, more power to you, right? Like you probably have a captive audience of carriers coming in there and booking your freight, but you probably don't have a wider demographic of that. One of the primary, the primary carrier demographic that we focus on is the mid-size carrier. We define the mid-size carrier as one. The easiest definition is if you need kind of a dispatcher or dispatch team in order to run the operations. This is usually 10 plus trucks. I like to whittle it down to like 20 to 251 assets. So if you have 20 to 251 assets, I believe there's roughly about 4,500 MCs that meet that demographic domestically. And quite frankly, you can probably build $100 million brokerage just around those 45 MCs. And so it's you have your load board, you have your marketplace. Do you want access to this additional capacity? And so that's how I approach the folks that kind of already have processes, already have technology enabling their team. Can I make that better? Yep. I have matching algorithms that are probably variably weighted different than they might be. And I might be able to give you access or help you reuse some of the folks that you're not reusing right now. Because I mean, especially when we started back in 2019, we would get these carrier lists from brokers that would be 10,000 MCs long. And you would say, how many of these MCs are you actually using?
Yeah.
Okay. And how many have you used in the last 30 days? And how many have you used in the last 60? How many have you used in the last 90? And are you building relationships with these folks? Because one thing that I got wrong almost immediately, and it was building technology to replace the relationship as opposed to building the technology that enables the relationship. Because in both the DoD and in freight specifically, it's all based on relationships. There's roughly 300,000 folks that support the DoD, and we're like the Kevin Bacon thing where you're like 6 degrees of
small world, right?
Yeah, it's wild how I'll be talking to somebody that has a background in the Army, right? And I'll be like, oh yeah, I know that guy, right? Like
it's the same in freight, right? There's a million of us, but we all know each other somehow. So
yep.
So if your sort of North Star is making the broker more efficient, what would you point to as the thing that across that segment that you target is the operational thing they struggle with the most?
That's a great question. So it is getting their folks to do from a leadership perspective, it's getting folks to do what they tell them to do. This is
about a strategy, but then the people on the floor are not necessarily affecting.
Yeah, and I appreciate it too, because the operators are, I use the term like closest alligator to the boat, right? So like they're killing the closest alligator to their boat, and that is the loads that they need to book today, right?
Yeah.
And leadership wants them to start building these relationships and start being able to scale some of these processes that they put in place, but they don't have either the bandwidth or they don't have the process. And that gets into, we kept on hearing, like, they're not listening to me. They're not doing what I want them to do. I can't keep them accountable. And I get it. And they're like, but honestly, I still need them to book the freight that's on the board.
Right.
And so how am I supposed to tell them otherwise? Right. Like, they're doing their job and they're doing it very well. And they're getting up to these, great bookings per day per rep numbers, which the two North Star metrics that we have is reduce your cost to procure so that we make you more effective so you can unlock that potential. And then it's at the operator level, it's how do I increase your bookings per day per rep? So how do I allow your reps to do more bookings, or how do I give them the time back so that they can start building those relationships? They can start leveraging the newtrul CRM to build those relationships.
What's a good, or I should say, what's a rule of thumb for what a typical broker move that load per day metric?
Yeah, load per day per rep.
What should we think about? I mean, this was a big topic of conversation at our Inland conference a couple weeks ago in Chicago, right? Which you've spoken at in the past. How do you increase that numbers and maybe like vastly increase it to a number that people who've been in the brokerage space a long time couldn't even fathom, right? So
the kind of benchmark, and would put it out to your audience if they have other, because I've been on about 60 brokerage floors this year, and that's almost the first question I ask.
Yep.
Some brokers don't know what the number is, right? The ones that do monitor it very, very strictly.
Yep.
The goal that I've seen, like is 10 bookings per day per rep.
Okay. That's aspirational.
Yeah, that's once you get there, I think getting to 15, getting to 20 is that's kind of the hurdle that I've seen.
Yep.
Once you get to 10, you've unlocked 15 and 20. Before 10, I guess that's obvious, but that seems like the kind of like, if you're going up the hill, that's the number that once you hit that number, like it becomes. So
the things that you put in place to go from 4 to 5 a day to 10 enable you to get way past 10.
Yes.
Maybe a way to think about it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it becomes exponential, I think, at that point.
Okay. Interesting.
So yeah, like I have a couple of folks that I've talked to just this week. We're sitting at around 6 to 7. I got one of them is up to 9 bookings per day per rep, and the other one just past 10. They're at 12 now. And so that's because if you think about it, like you want to win more freight. So we think about kind of very simplistically, and this is way too simplistic for brokerage, but kind of have 3 phases. You win freight, you build freight, you book freight. And so winning freight from the shipper, winning those RFPs, winning contracts, et cetera, making sure that it can go from shipper TMS to broker TMS, and then making sure that you get the right carrier on that, right? So kind of those 3 phases. We focus on the book freight, right? But if you don't have those numbers, if you aren't able to get up to that 10, that 12, that 15 per day per rep, you don't have the capacity to win more freight. Right. Unless you build that team up. But we also see, like, in folks can probably attest to this too, what's the time to onboard? What's the time to train a new rep? The best I've seen is about 3 months, but most of them take 6 to 12. And there's a lot of attrition.
Yeah, for sure. Very interesting. How do you, so from you talked a bit about change management from a like an adoption perspective.
Yeah.
Right. Where do you see the most friction or reluctance? Is it at the investment, strategic executive level? Like it takes a lot to get them over the hump. Once they're over, they buy in, or is it, no, that's more straightforward. They see the ROI, they see the load, the metric of, loads per day per rep. It's on the floor getting them to buy in to using it.
Yeah, it's so the leadership buy-in is usually slightly easier than operator buy-in. So it's a buy-in thing. That's the first piece.
Yep.
The second piece is incentivization structure. Yep. You have to ensure that you're enabling and you're still incentivizing folks to leverage the technology. Mm-hmm. We've had when we first started, we've had folks, like saying like, well, I'm going to reduce commissions on anything that comes through a newtrul booking. And what that means is you have your operators kind of sabotaging, quite frankly, the software and not buying into it because they're not competing against it. You need it to enable. So that's the first piece, is to ensure that the incentive structures align properly. The second piece is that the operator buy-in. The third piece is to make it so easy for them to use that if you think about it, we have, I don't even know where my phone is, but we have the iPhone, right? It's like you have folks that are coming in, they're leveraging some of these like Google Sheets or some of this really old DOS looking technology. And then they go and look at their phone. It's just this beautiful technology right in front of them, right? So that's what they're used to. So giving them a nice UI to operate in, but also making it so easy. And where we kind of where we've taken that is, particularly I'll go back to like the CRM use case, which is I have that integration. I'm already pulling over. I have a pre-built FMCSA data enriched, algorithm enriched CRM that they don't have to, all you have to do is start updating it as opposed to initially building it, because it already has your entire network. And then it's enriched with the newtrul network. It's enriched with some of that data. And then we bring over your historical bookings, your preferred lanes, your available assets. We've integrated into your email system and your phone system. That's where it gets like real powerful. And where this is going is the other part of that carrier sales CRM is the tribal knowledge. So you're on the phone with the carrier and you're writing down on either a piece of paper or in your spreadsheet all of this information, but that stays with you.
Yep.
That doesn't go to the business. And a lot of times that's on a Post-it note that gets coffee spilled on it and thrown away. And so now that's very important data.
Or even if it's digital, it could be on a note on your phone. It's not like networked with everybody else. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just a couple things on the adoption, because we're quickly running out of time, and around the CRM thing. So I remember 12 years ago, probably, maybe not that far, 10 years ago, I was at an event where Ryder talked about they invested in a system at the time, and to incentivize usage, they tied annual bonus to if you didn't meet a certain usage percentage for this technology. We understand it's complicated, or we understand it's a change. It should be less complicated, but it's beneficial to the business that you use it and learn it. And it's so beneficial, we're going to pay you more if you actually use it. So I've always thought that was super interesting. I've never heard anyone talk about it.
I think, and I could be off here, but I'm pretty sure CH did the same thing.
I'm sure others did, right? Like that was I'm sure they were not the only one. That's the only one I've heard talk about it publicly. The other thing, Ryan Schreiber at Metaphora talks about this all the time, about when you as an executive make a decision around investing in technology, the first thing you need to do is explain to people not that you're doing it, but why you're doing it, right? So that there's an understanding of like why they're being asked to change something in their day-to-day. So I think that's also a super piece.
Great shout out. The other thing that Ryan says that I completely agree with is talking about making sure your processes are in place first. Making sure you have, and I don't want to like put words into anybody's mouth here, but like to me, like the way I interpret that is just make sure that you have that you've done that manual, if you will.
Right.
You've done that without the software, and you have that foundation established. Because if you don't have the foundation established, software is going to be an inhibitor no matter what. It's like so it's more of taking kind of a service as a software approach as opposed to software as a service approach.
Oh, interesting. I'm going to steal that from you at some point.
Yeah.
I'll try to give you credit whenever I end up using that.
I'm sure I steal from somebody anyway. So
every idea is borrowed. Okay, the CRM. So your move into CRM is super interesting because I think we talked about this a month or so ago. Yeah. I have always taken the opinion, as someone who's never been a broker but watches it from the outside, that if you don't own assets and you don't own cargo, you're essentially a service organization, right? Mm-hmm. And you're a sales organization, right? And so why are most brokers built around a TMS or an ERP as opposed to a CRM? And so what your answer to that?
So I think a lot of brokers use, I imagine, and I know that like Salesforce and some of your other types of CRMs for the sales piece of it. One thing that TMSs do very, very well is the APAR functionality associated with freight brokerage. I think that's where they're super sticky. Sure. And so totally appreciate that. Like that's very necessary.
Important. Yes. Payment is important. Yeah.
But I think one of the reasons is there's, insofar as I'm aware, and maybe there has been, obviously my background, like I haven't been in the industry as long as some people have been in this industry for their entire lives. We were chatting about that before. They were like talking about this at the dinner table because they've been in it, since they were born. But insofar as I'm aware, I don't know of any like dedicated, specifically built carrier CRM. Mm-hmm. So carrier sales CRM that's out there. There might be, but that is fully integrated with your system of record, that pulls over all of that you don't have to build from scratch, and that you can start leveraging. Like we have playbooks. So like if you have that process and that standardization built into your operational process at on the brokerage floor, you just paste that into your playbook for all your reps to follow for the day. Right. And so it's like, here's your plays. Call that carrier when they drop off and see if they need a reload, or set up that task beforehand so that and then when we have as we're integrated into their phone systems, it's like, now we're recording that call and now we can transcribe that information into that carrier profile. So now you have, right. So now you don't need to take notes anymore. You can still take notes, but they don't need to be as robust because you're getting that information real time. And then you're able to leverage that information in the future, particularly when the market changes, right? So like when relationships become crucial, as they always are, but when you need to lean on those a lot more. I go back to like but like I believe what brokers are selling is they sell service, right? Like that's when I talk to brokers, like, how do you sell to shippers? I sell my service, which is critical. I sell my network, but I think what they're really selling is their data, their ability to leverage their data and network.
Well, I mean, what and I'm sure you have observed this too, is it's not that people don't have CRMs. It's not that people don't have TMSs. It's that those two systems, there's a sales system and an operations or execution system. And to the extent that they're sharing data, it's because someone is pulling data over and manually entering it in about a customer or about a load, in a note in the CRM. And so the ability to kind of connect all that information across both of them is what I'm getting at when I say a CRM based approach seems to make more sense, because the execution is like a given, right? Like you have to be able to execute well, but the ability to know about details about a customer at the moment that you're talking to them is like next level in terms of what I'm thinking of. So, okay. We are about out of time. I have to ask this. I ask this question of every guest. This is always the hardest question, right? Who's your favorite band?
I've been thinking about it. I've been thinking about this question for like 24 hours now.
All right.
I think it changes for me over time. Right. So like, I mean, I have to go with like the OG. I'm a big Tupac fan. I grew up in the 90s.
All right, cool.
And I know it's probably crass, but like that just gets me going, man. Like Tupac, like I work out to Tupac. Like I think he's
hey, our favorite band is whoever is played the most on Spotify. I should actually ask people not what they want to say, but what Spotify says about them, because that's the reality. Is like when we have our AirPods in, listening to what we really want to. That's the reality. So that's
RIP obviously. But I bet you'd get a lot of T Swift. You'd get a lot of.
I don't think I've gotten anybody saying Taylor Swift. Actually.
Well, I'm saying if you.
Oh, you mean on the if the data told the story. That's true.
Exactly.
That is true. Yeah, there's a reason why she's so big, right? Nobody likes
her. Or if you have daughters like me, like it's probably
Olivia Rodrigo, Billie Eilish, that kind of stuff. So,
for sure.
For sure. If I looked at my sons, it would be Imagine Dragons, like no question whatsoever. Well, cool, John. Really appreciate the conversation. What's the best way for people to get in touch?
So, I mean, personally in touch, LinkedIn, which I think will be on this. my email is just john@newtrul.com. So can certainly email me there. I think our website, so we have demo sign-up forms there. Check it out. Those are probably the three best ways so it's just www.newtrul.com. Newtrul is NEWTRUL. But yeah, those are probably the three best ways.
Cool. Well, I appreciate the time and the thoughts. A really cool conversation, and best of luck. We'll talk soon. Okay.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Eric. And thank you, everyone.
Great. Thanks. Thanks to Nate, by the way, for the shout out on the show. Glad you could listen in. I need to have you on at some point. That's like one of those things that's been hanging out forever. All right. It's that time, everyone. So I've tested this one. I've road tested this particular joke a couple times over the past week and gotten wildly different results. One group looked at me like I was an alien from another planet. The other group loved it and like did spit takes. So if people in the US smile, then what do people in Europe do? Skilometer. I'm just going to let that one hang out for a second. And give me a thumbs up or thumbs down, or tell me you're never watching the show again. And then I'll know if it was really good or really bad or somewhere in the middle. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. Thank you to John for a fantastic conversation. Definitely reach out if you're interested to hear more about what they're doing. Thank you to Nicole, world's best show producer. Thanks to the Let's Talk Supply Chain team for making this so easy and so fun for me. But most of all, thanks to you all again for tuning in today. We'll be back in 2 weeks, the beginning of November, with another great episode. Register for TPM, register for Breakbulk. See you all soon. Have a great weekend. Bye.